The baby is coming. The call came at 2:47 in the morning, and Kwon Ji-suk almost didn't answer it. He was in the middle of a negotiation that had been going sideways for the better part of 3 hours, surrounded by 6 of his most dangerous men, a table full of money he didn't need, and a rival who had run out of excuses. The phone buzzing in his breast pocket was an inconvenience, a distraction. He had a strict policy about interruptions during business, and everyone in Seoul's underworld knew it. But the number on the screen made him stop cold. It was a Nigerian number, a foreign area code he hadn't seen in 8 months. 8 months exactly. Kwon Ji-suk stepped away from the table without a word. "Who is this?" His voice was granite, low, the kind of voice that came from a man who had never needed to raise it to be obeyed. The woman on the other end sounded like she had been running. Her breath came in short bursts, and when she spoke, and it was with the clipped, urgent English of someone trying to communicate a crisis across a language barrier. "Mr. Kwon, my name is Abeki. I'm Tabena's friend. She told me never to call this number. She made me swear. But she is in the hospital right now, and the baby is coming early, and I cannot reach her sister, and you are the only other number I have. So please, I am begging you, please come." The warehouse went completely silent in Kwon Ji-suk's ears, not because the noise stopped. His men were still talking, but his brain had filtered all of it out and replaced everything with 3 words that hit him like a collision at full speed. "The baby is coming." What baby? And for the first time in years, his voice didn't sound like his own. The woman, Abeke, made a sound that was half sob and half exasperation, the kind of sound a person makes when they have no time to explain and no choice but to try. "Tobena, your ex-wife, she is 8 months pregnant, sir. When she has been pregnant since before the divorce, and she did not tell you, and I know this is a lot right now, but she is in emergency labor, and the doctors are saying there might be complications, and she needs someone here because I cannot do this alone. And please, please, please just come." Kwon Ji-suk stood so still that one of his men, the one closest to him, quietly put a hand on his arm to check if he was breathing. He was. Barely. 8 months ago. And he had sat across a mahogany desk from his wife, Tobena Okafor Kwon, the most infuriatingly confident, brilliantly outspoken, achingly beautiful woman he had ever made the catastrophic mistake of marrying. And he had signed divorce papers while she watched him with eyes that gave absolutely nothing away. She had not cried. She had not begged. She had sat straight-backed and magnificent in a white dress she had worn specifically to remind him of their wedding day. One signed her own name with a gold pen, stood up, shaken his lawyer's hand, ignored Ji-suk completely, and walked out. He had watched her leave and told himself he was doing the right thing. And now she was in a hospital somewhere with his child on the way, a child she had apparently known about and chosen not to tell him, and the only reason he was finding out was because her friend was braver than she was. "Which hospital?" he said. And the rival across the warehouse called out something irritated about respect and wasted time. Ji-suk turned around and looked at him, just looked at him, and the man went quiet so fast it was almost funny. "Which hospital?" Ji-suk said again, softer this time. Abeki gave him the address. It was a private medical facility on Lagos Island. She was in Nigeria. Of course she was. She had gone home. Ji-suk ended the call, walked back to the table, looked at his second-in-command, "Oh Taijin. I'm a compact man with patient eyes and the organizational skills of a military general," and said, "Clear the room. Cancel everything for the next 48 hours. I need the jet ready in 20 minutes. Taejin didn't ask questions. That was why Ji-suk kept him. He simply turned to the room, clapped his hands once, and said, "Business is concluded for the evening." The rival opened his mouth. Taejin looked at him. The rival closed his mouth. 23 minutes later, Kwon Ji-suk was in a car headed for the airport, his mind doing the kind of mathematics it had no training for. 8 months. She would have found out she was pregnant right around when the divorce was filed. Maybe before, maybe after. Either way, she had known. She had sat across that desk with her gold pen and her white dress, and her chin lifted just slightly higher than necessary, and she had known. He didn't know whether to be furious or terrified. He was both. He was also, underneath the fury and the terror, something he hadn't felt in 8 months, which was necessary. Like there was somewhere he was supposed to be, and he was finally moving in the right direction. If you're not already following this channel, this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. Subscribe, hit that bell, and let's get into it. The flight was 7 hours. Jisuk spent 4 of them on the phone managing his organization remotely, delegating the pieces of the canceled meeting to people who could handle them, making sure the situation in Seoul remained stable in his absence. He spent the remaining 3 hours doing something he had not done since his mother died when he was 19 years old. He sat with his hands in his lap and thought about how badly he had handled something. He and Tabena had been married for 2 years. One, they had met at a trade conference in Singapore where she had been representing her family's import business, and he had been attending as a legitimate real estate developer. The face he wore to international events, clean and pressed and entirely misleading. She had given a presentation that made 3 venture capitalists in the front row rethink their entire investment strategy. Jisuk had watched from the back of the room with the particular stillness of a man who has just seen something that recalibrates everything. She was tall. She had the kind of presence that filled rooms without effort, a deep brown complexion that caught light in ways photography never quite managed to capture. And she spoke with the precision and confidence of someone who had never once in her life wondered whether she deserved to be in the room. She wore her natural hair in a massive, glorious crown of coils that she had decorated with a single gold pin, and she handled difficult questions from the audience with the cheerful efficiency of a person swatting flies. Jisuk had introduced himself afterward. She had looked at his business card, looked at him, and said, "Real estate, sure," with exactly the amount of skepticism that told him she was the most perceptive person he had met in a decade. He had been fascinated immediately and entirely. And they were married 14 months later in a ceremony that blended Nigerian tradition with a Korean reception so seamlessly that both families spent the entire night convinced they were getting the better end of the cultural exchange. Tabena wore deep red and gold. She danced with her aunties during the traditional ceremony with the uninhibited joy of a woman completely at home in her body. And Jisuk had stood to the side watching her and felt, for the first time in his adult life, like something in him had stopped bracing for impact. The marriage was not simple. His world was not simple. Tabena was not a woman who could be shielded from realities, and she was not a woman who wanted to be shielded. What destroyed them was not the danger of his life or the complications of distance or cultural clashes, though there were plenty of all three. What destroyed them was a woman named Han Suman, who appeared at a public event, told a very convincing story to a journalist, and produced photographs that told a story Jisuk could not immediately disprove. The photographs showed him in a hotel corridor with Suman. They were close. It looked intimate. It was not, but it looked it, and by the time he understood what had happened, understood that someone had staged the entire thing with enough precision to be credible, Tabena had already seen the article. She had read every word. She had looked at every photograph, and then she had called him and asked him, in a voice that was completely level, whether it was true. He had said no. She had said, "I believe you believe that," which was, in retrospect, the most devastating thing anyone had ever said to him. 3 weeks later, she asked for a divorce, not in a rage, not in tears. In the same measured, resolved tone she used for business decisions that she had already fully processed. He had made arguments. She had listened to every single one of them with genuine attention, and then explained, very calmly, that the issue was not just the photographs. The issue was a pattern of absences and half-truths and a life she could not fully see into, and she was tired of loving someone she could only ever partially know. He had signed the papers because he thought she needed him to. He thought it was what she wanted. He thought that was what loving someone who was exhausted looked like. He was, as it turned out, comprehensively wrong. The plane landed in Lagos at 6 in the morning. Jisuk was through customs in 11 minutes, which was not the legal minimum, but was what happened when you were Kwon Jisuk and your people had made certain advance arrangements. A car was waiting. He gave the driver the hospital address. The city came alive around him in the early light, motorbikes threading through traffic with cheerful fearlessness, vendors setting up along roadsides, the particular noise and color of Lagos waking up. And under different circumstances he might have appreciated it. He and Tabena had talked once about coming here together, about her showing him her city, the places she grew up, the food he needed to try before he could claim any real understanding of who she was. Another thing he had failed to make happen. The hospital was private and well-appointed, the kind of facility designed to make wealthy patients feel that everything was under control. The receptionist at the front desk was a young man in his 20s who looked up from his screen and clocked Jisuk's entire energy in about 2 seconds, which was an impressive and correct read of the situation. "I'm looking for Tabena Okafor," Jisuk said. "She was admitted last night. Emergency labor." The receptionist typed quickly. "Are you family?" "I'm the father of her child." A pause. The receptionist's expression was carefully neutral. "Sir, I'll need to confirm with the patient before I can allow—" "She's in labor," Jisuk said. "Possibly complicated labor. Her friend called me from this number." He showed the screen. "If something happens to either of them while I'm standing at this desk having an administrative conversation, this hospital will remember it for a very long time. I suggest you call upstairs." It took 4 minutes. Then a nurse appeared and escorted him to the 3rd floor without further discussion. The door to the room at the end of the corridor had a small window. Jisuk reached it and stopped. Through the glass he could see Tabena. She was upright in the hospital bed, her natural hair pulled back into a puff that had seen better hours, her face doing that specific thing it did when she was managing pain without performing it. Jaw set, eyes focused, breath controlled. She was talking to the woman beside her, who was presumably Abeke, eyes short and round-faced and currently holding Tabena's hand, and saying something that made Tabena roll her eyes with the long-suffering affection of someone dealing with a deeply dramatic friend. She looked exhausted. She looked strong. She looked exactly like herself. Jisuk pushed the door open. Both women turned. Tabena's face went through approximately 5 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds. Shock, recognition, and something that flickered very fast and might have been relief before she locked it down. Outrage, and then, settling over everything like a mask she was pulling on with insufficient time to adjust it properly, a kind of wary composure that she wore like armor. "No," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "Absolutely not. Who called you?" Abeke raised her hand with the resigned expression of someone who has already accepted the consequences. "That would be me. Hi. Oh, and I regret nothing." Tabena turned to look at her friend with an expression that communicated several things simultaneously, including but not limited to betrayal, exhaustion, and the acknowledgement that this was not the moment for that particular conversation. Then she turned back to Jisuk. "You need to leave," she said. Jisuk walked into the room and stood at the foot of her bed, his hands in his pockets, his posture entirely calm. And he had conducted negotiations in rooms with armed men who wanted him dead. He could handle this. "No," he said simply. Tabena stared at him. "Excuse me." "I said no, I'm not leaving. This is my room, in my country, and I did not invite you." "Your friend did." "My friend," Tabena said, turning to give Abeke a look of profound significance, "is going to find her car has been moved to a different parking spot when this is over." Abeke pressed her lips together very hard, and she was clearly trying not to laugh, which given the circumstances said something impressive about her resilience as a human being. Jisuk looked at the monitor beside the bed, at the numbers scrolling across it, at the chart hanging from the foot of the bed, cataloging details the way he cataloged everything, quickly and completely. Then he looked at Tabena again. "You were pregnant when you signed the papers," he said. Not accusatory, not yet. Just a fact laid on the table between them. Tabena held his gaze without flinching. "Yes." "You knew?" "Yes." "And you decided not to tell me?" "I decided," she said, her voice perfectly level even as another contraction moved across her face and she gripped the bed rail. "That I had the right to make that choice. We were getting divorced. You had made your position on our marriage very clear." "I made my—" Jisuk stopped, controlled himself. This was not the conversation to have right now. He could see the pain moving through her. I could see her managing it the way she managed everything, with capability and minimal performance, and everything in him that was functional wanted to do something about it. "We'll have this conversation later. Right now you're in labor." "Brilliant observation. You should be in medicine." Abeke made a sound that she quickly converted into a cough. Jisuk moved to the side of the bed. Tabena tracked him with her eyes the way she always had, with that watchful intelligence that missed nothing. And when he reached for her hand, she pulled it back. "Don't," she said, "Tabena. Don't do that thing where you show up and act like nothing happened and expect everything to rearrange itself around you. This is not Seoul. These are not your people. This is my hospital and my labor and my—" Another contraction. This one was bigger. He could see it in the way her breath changed, in the tightness that moved across her jaw. Without asking again, Jisuk put his hand on her lower back and applied firm, unsteady pressure at exactly the point where he knew, from the reading he had done in the months after their marriage, when he had been trying to understand what it might look like if they had children, that it would help. Tabena's breath released slowly. She didn't thank him, but she also didn't move away. "I'm not leaving," he said again quietly. "You can be angry about it later. Right now I'm here." Abeke, I'm watching this with the expression of someone taking detailed mental notes for a story she would tell for the rest of her life, leaned over and whispered to Tabena. He knew exactly where to press. That means he researched. That means— "Abeke," Tabena said through her teeth, "I will relocate your car myself." The next several hours moved in the particular way time moves during crisis, too fast and too slow simultaneously. The doctor, a woman named Doctor, Anadalek, with the focused energy of someone who had handled a great many dramatic situations and found them all professionally interesting, arrived to do an examination and raised one eyebrow when she found Jisuk standing at Tabena's side with the resolute calm of a man who had made a decision and was comfortable with it. "Father?" she asked. "No," Tabena said. "Yes," Jisuk said at exactly the same moment. "Doctor." Anadalek looked between them with an expression that suggested she had neither the time nor the inclination to adjudicate the question. "I'm going to need you both to be on the same page in the next few minutes because we have a development." The development was that the baby, who had apparently inherited her mother's commitment to doing things on her own terms and her own schedule, was showing signs of distress. Her heart rate was doing something the monitors didn't love, and Doctor Adalek explained in the clear and efficient language of someone who respected her patients enough to be honest that she was recommending an emergency cesarean section. The word emergency changed the air in the room. Tabena, who had been formidable throughout, whose composure had not cracked once, reached sideways in that moment and grabbed Jisuk's hand without looking at him. Her grip was iron. He held on without comment. "Is she going to be okay?" Tabena asked. And her voice was still controlled, but her hand was not. "We are very good at what we do here," Dr. Adalek said, which was not exactly a yes but was delivered with enough conviction to function as one. "We need to move quickly. Sir, you'll need to scrub in if you want to be in the room, and I need an answer in the next 60 seconds. Tabena looked at Jisuk then. Really looked at him. The way she had looked at him in Singapore across a conference room when she was deciding whether to trust his business card, the way she had looked at him at the altar when she was deciding whether she was making the best or most complicated decision of her life, reading him, taking inventory. "Fine," she said. "He can come." Jisuk was already moving toward the scrub sink. The operating theater was cold and very bright. Tabena was awake but medicated, the lower half of her separated from her view by a surgical drape. Jisuk sat at her head, his gloved hands holding hers, his voice low and steady as he talked to her about nothing in particular, about the drive from the airport, about the city waking up outside, about the vendors he had seen setting up along the road. He talked because silence was the enemy in rooms like this, and because it was, he realized with some surprise, on the longest uninterrupted conversation he had managed to have with her in the better part of a year. She listened. She didn't say much, but her hand stayed in his. When the cry came, it was small and outraged and absolutely furious in the way that only very healthy, very unhappy about being born babies cry, and both Tabena and Jisuk stopped breathing for exactly the same moment. The nurse brought her to Tabena's chest after the initial assessments, a small, dark-skinned, absolutely perfect girl with a full head of black hair and her mother's determined chin and what was going to be. Jisuk could already see it, a personality entirely her own. "Hello," Tabena said to her daughter, in a voice Jisuk had never heard her use before, softer than anything, the voice underneath all the armor. "Hello, you. I've been waiting for you." Jisuk looked at his daughter and felt something in his chest restructure itself permanently. He had run an organization of 300 people for 15 years. He had made decisions that affected entire industries. He had been afraid exactly twice in his adult life, once when he thought he was going to lose a deal that would have collapsed his entire financial structure, and once the moment he realized Tabena was actually going to leave. This was the third time, because she was so small, and she was his, and he had almost not known about her at all. "What's her name?" a nurse asked. "My pen ready." Tabena looked at Jisuk over the baby's head. It was a look with several layers: acknowledgement, complication. And underneath both of those, something that had not gone away in 8 months of deliberate absence. "Adeze," Tabena said. "Adeze Kwan." His surname. She had given their daughter his surname. Jisuk said nothing because he could not. He just nodded and looked at Adeze and made a silent promise to someone too small to hear it. Later, when Tabena was in recovery and the baby was sleeping in the transparent bassinet beside her bed, Abeka reappeared with the focused efficiency of a woman who had been holding everything together in the background and was now ready to hand the baton to someone else. She set a cup of tea on Tabena's bedside table, a bottle of water near Jisuk, and then stood in the middle of the room and looked at them both. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to sleep in the family lounge for 2 hours. When I come back, I expect at minimum a ceasefire. Adeze does not need to come into the world hearing her parents conduct a formal grievance proceeding." She pointed at Jisuk. "You, don't be an idiot." She pointed at Tabena. "You, let him not be an idiot." She picked up her bag. "I'll see you both shortly. Congratulations, she's beautiful." She left. The room was quiet. Tabena looked at the ceiling for a moment, then closed her eyes, and then opened them again and looked at Jisuk in the chair beside her bed, where he had positioned himself with no apparent intention of moving. "You must be exhausted," she said finally. 7-hour flight." "I'm fine. You've been awake since whatever time it was when Abeke called you." "I said I'm fine. You're going to have a stress injury in your jaw from clenching it for 6 hours." Jisuk unclenched his jaw. "Better?" "Marginally." She looked at Adeze, sleeping in the bassinet, on the small, perfect miracle of her, and her expression did the thing it did when she was feeling something too large to entirely contain. "I know you have questions. I have several. I know you're angry. I have several of those as well." Tabena turned to look at him fully. This was the thing about her that had always undone him, the directness, the refusal to look away from difficult things. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, straight on, accounting for all of it. And I found out 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized. I already knew by the time I sat down at that desk. Jisuk kept his face very still. "Go on." "I didn't tell you because—" She stopped, started again. "Because I was hurt and proud, and I had already built a case in my head about who you were and what our marriage was, and telling you about the pregnancy felt like giving you leverage I didn't want you to have, like you would use it to keep me, and I didn't want to be kept. When I wanted to be chosen, and I'd convinced myself you weren't going to choose me without a reason." The silence after that was the kind that had weight. "I would have chosen you," Jisuk said, his voice lower than usual. "With or without a reason. I signed those papers because you asked me to, and I thought that was what respect looked like. I thought you needed me to let you go. I spent 8 months being wrong about that." Tabena looked at him for a long moment. "I spent 8 months being wrong too." She glanced at Adeze. "She came early. She wasn't supposed to be here for another month. And when Abeki called me from the waiting area saying she had found your number in my old phone and was she allowed to call it, I said absolutely not." A pause. "And then I had another contraction and said fine, call whoever you want." Jisuk's mouth did something that was almost a smile. "So I have contractions to thank." "Don't make it charming." I'm still processing." "I know. I'm still angry about the photographs. I still don't fully know what happened." "I know that too." Jisuk leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely clasped, the posture of a man choosing honesty over performance. The woman in those photographs was hired, someone arranged it, someone who knew that your one non-negotiable was faithfulness and decided to use it. And I've spent 8 months trying to prove it because I needed you to know it wasn't real, even after the divorce, even after I thought it was too late. I'm close to having something concrete. Tabena stared at him. Who? I don't know yet, but I will. The monitors beeped softly. A daze shifted in her sleep, made a small sound, settled again. Both of her parents watched her do it with the synchronized attention of people who had only just discovered they were on the same side. "Oh, and she looks like you," Tabena said quietly. "She has your chin. She has your frown. I don't frown." Tabena looked at him. "I have a resting expression of focused concern," he clarified. Tabena laughed. It was short and involuntary and surprised her, he could tell, because she pressed her lips together immediately after as though she had not meant to give that to him. But it was there. It had happened. Jisuk filed it carefully. He had always collected her laughs, the rare, genuine ones. And the ones she didn't plan. They were the best thing about being in a room with her. He stayed through the night. When the nurses came to encourage him to use the family lounge, he politely declined in a manner that communicated he was not going to do that. When Tabena woke twice in the night to feed a daze, he was awake both times, and he got up both times, and he did the particular thing of lifting the baby from the bassinet before Tabena had to reach, handing her over, and then sitting back down without comment, which was, Tabena admitted to herself, the precise most useful thing a person could do in that situation. Morning arrived with sunlight through the hospital blinds and the sound of the city outside recommencing its usual busy conversation with itself. Abeke returned with food from a place she trusted, distributed it with the authority of a woman who had appointed herself logistics manager of this entire situation. Amin sat in the corner eating her own breakfast while watching Tabena and Jisuk negotiate the complicated project of being in the same room as each other. "This is better than the television," she said to no one in particular. "Abeke," Tabena said. "I said what I said." But the moment of warmth was interrupted by Jisuk's phone, which he had set to vibrate and which had been vibrating with increasing urgency for the past 20 minutes. He had been ignoring it, and when it went off a seventh time in quick succession, he excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Taejin's voice came immediately. "We have a problem." "Define problem." "Ji Dongwook is making a move. He's been watching your absence and he's positioned people near 2 of our properties in Gangnam. He's not attacking yet, but he's communicating intent. And boss, there's something else." A pause that told Jisuk the something else was the actual reason for the call. "One, we found the source of the photographs." Jisuk went very still in the hospital corridor. "Talk." "It was Han Chae-young, your former business partner's wife. Apparently Park Minjun, the one you pushed out of the consortium 3 years ago, had her organize it. Han Sumin, the woman in the photographs, is her cousin. Minjun's been sitting on this since the divorce. But he was careless with his communications, and our people found the thread." Kwon Ji-suk leaned one hand against the corridor wall and spent approximately 10 seconds doing the kind of internal accounting that most people would take 10 minutes to complete. Park Minjun, who had smiled at him across boardroom tables, who had attended his wedding, who had shaken his hand when Tabena walked into the reception in her red and gold dress. "Get me everything," he said. "Every communication, on every financial record, every connection, and Taejin. The other thing, Dongwook. He's positioning, not moving, we have time." "Then deal with the positioning. Send the message that I'm aware and I'm unimpressed and my absence is temporary. I'll be back in 48 hours. "Understood. And boss, is everyone all right? The reason for the trip?" Jisuk looked through the small window in the door at Tabena, who was holding a daze against her chest with the natural ease of a woman who had apparently been mentally preparing for motherhood for 8 months, and who was saying something to Abeke that was making Abeke cover her mouth to suppress what was clearly a very loud laugh. "Everyone is all right," he said. "Get me that evidence." He went back inside. Tabena read his face the moment he entered because she always read his face, and it was one of the things that had terrified and delighted him in equal measure throughout their marriage, the way her perception worked like a searchlight. "What happened?" Jisuk sat down. He looked at her. He made a decision that he recognized as either the smartest or most vulnerable thing he had done in a very long time, and then he told her everything. About Taejin's call, about the photographs, about Park Minjin, about Han Sumin and her cousin. On about the 3 years of a slow and patient setup executed by a man with a grudge and enough resources to be creative about it. Tabena listened without interrupting, which was a thing she only did when what she was hearing required the full capacity of her attention. When he finished, the room was quiet except for Adie's making small, contented sounds against her mother's chest. Park Minjin, Tabena said. Her voice was very controlled, which meant she was very angry. Jisuk had learned early in their marriage that Tabena at her most controlled was Tabena at her most dangerous. He sat at our wedding, he gave a speech. Yes. He ate my family's jollof rice. He did. And then he destroyed our marriage using a woman he paid and photographs he staged and timing he chose specifically to cause maximum damage. Her eyes came up to his. He planned to end us. He succeeded, for 8 months. Tabena looked at a daze, and something moved across her face that Jisuk didn't have a word for, a combination of grief and fury and the particular reckoning of a woman who has spent 8 months building a life around a lie and is now accounting for the cost. 8 months, she said quietly. She grew up inside me for 8 months while I thought you had, while I believed you had. She stopped. I know, Jisuk said. I kept your name, she said abruptly. When I registered with the hospital here. And I still had my old documents. I hadn't changed it yet. I told myself it was administrative inconvenience. It wasn't. Jisuk said nothing. He just looked at her. I'm still angry, she said. I know. Not at you, or at least not primarily at you. Mostly at the situation and at Park Minjin and at myself for being so... for not... She exhaled. I should have asked more questions. I should have trusted you enough to ask instead of deciding I already had the answer. I should have fought harder. Why not let you leave because I thought loving you meant accepting your decision? I was confusing respect with surrender. Abeke, who had been sitting quietly in the corner with the tact of someone who understood exactly when to disappear into the background, chose this moment to very quietly gather her bag and say, I'm going to find more tea. She was gone before either of them could respond. The door closed softly. Tabena looked at Jisuk. Jisuk looked at Tabena. Between them, Adeza Kwan slept. I'm blissfully untroubled by the complicated history of the two people responsible for her existence. What do we do? Tabena asked. About which part? Start with Minjun. Jisuk's expression settled into the particular configuration she had always recognized as him shifting into his other mode, the one he usually kept carefully out of her sight, on the one that ran on years of survival and calculation and the cold efficiency of a man who had built an empire from nothing and defended it from everything. That will be handled, he said. He made a mistake. He thought destroying our marriage was enough. He forgot that the only thing that motivates me more than ambition is consequence. I'm not asking you to do anything I can't ask about directly, Tabena said. Not a warning, a statement about what she needed. Jisuk looked at her steadily. Some things in my world are better for you not to know the details of. And some things, she said equally steadily, I need to know so that I'm not standing in a room 8 months from now being blindsided by something I could have understood if you'd trusted me with it. The moment stretched between them. Then Jisuk nodded slowly, the nod of a man making a concession that costs him something and is choosing to make it anyway. Minjin will face legal consequences. There's enough evidence now for an actual case, financial fraud connected to the consortium he joined after leaving mine. It's been building for 2 years. What happens to his reputation and his organization in the context of Seoul's other networks is something I have more direct influence over, and it will be proportionate and it will be complete. He will not come back from it. Tabena held his gaze for a long moment. Okay, she said. Good. She shifted a daze slightly, one who made a sound of mild objection and then settled. Tabena looked down at her, then back up. I want to be angry for a little while longer, about all of it, about the 8 months, about going through this pregnancy thinking I was doing the right thing by keeping you out of it when actually I was just protecting myself at our daughter's expense. You were protecting yourself and that's allowed, Jisuk said. You thought I had betrayed you. Everything you did made sense inside that belief. Well, don't revise your own history now that the belief has changed. Tabena stared at him. You know, you're significantly more emotionally intelligent when there's no deal on the table. I've had 8 months to practice. On who? On no one. On the walls of my apartment. On Taejun occasionally, who is deeply uncomfortable with feelings but has the loyalty to listen anyway. Tabena's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Close. I missed you, she said quietly, like it cost her something to say it. I spent 8 months being furious and building a life without you and being entirely capable and also missing you every single day. It was extremely inconvenient. I dreamed about you constantly, Jisuk said. It was not poetic. It was a significant administrative burden on my sleep schedule. She did smile then, full and genuine and slightly helpless, the one he had collected for 2 years, the one he had thought he would never see again. You can't do that, she said. One, you can't make me laugh when I'm trying to maintain appropriate emotional boundaries. I'll work on it. Don't you dare. They stayed like that, in the quiet, in the morning light, a daze between them in the most literal sense, while the city outside went on about its business, unaware that something that had been broken was very slowly, carefully beginning to consider being reassembled. Jisuk stayed in Lagos for 4 days. He had intended to stay 2, but on the morning of the second day, and as he was preparing to tell Tabena he had to return to Seoul to manage the situation with Dongwook and the Minjin evidence, a daze developed a fever. It was minor. The doctor said so immediately. It was common in newborns, easily managed, nothing to worry about. They said all of this clearly and correctly, and Tabena heard it and processed it and was appropriately reassured by the medical information. And then she sat by the bassinet where a daze was being monitored with a cool compress and held her daughter's tiny hand through the side opening, and her face did the thing that it never did in front of people. It cracked, just slightly, just enough for the fear underneath to show. Jisuk saw it. He sat beside her. He did not say anything. He put his hand over hers where it was wrapped around Adaze's fingers, and he stayed there, not fixing anything, not performing competence, just present. My soul could wait. Taejun, when Jisuk called to extend his stay, said, "Of course, I'll manage everything." And then, after a pause, "Is the baby all right?" "She will be." And another pause, longer, from a man who had worked with Jisuk for 12 years and had very strong opinions that he almost never expressed. "The other situation, is there progress?" "There's conversation," Jisuk said. "High conversation is better than 8 months of silence." Taejun, "I'm simply noting, handle the Dongwook positioning, I'll call you tonight." Dongwook, it turned out, was a problem that had less to do with territory and more to do with a very specific piece of information he believed he had acquired about Jisuk's financial structure, information that was partially correct and mostly misinterpreted. Taejun, following Jisuk's instructions, arranged a meeting. One delivered a particular set of documents through intermediaries and allowed Dongwook to arrive at his own conclusions. The positioning stopped within 36 hours. Sometimes the most effective communication was simply allowing a person to realize they had misunderstood the geometry of the situation. The Minjin evidence was another matter. That required Jisuk's direct attention, and on the third evening, and while Tabena was sleeping and Adaze was fed and content and being watched by a night nurse, Jisuk sat in the family lounge with his laptop and worked through the documentation his people had assembled. 3 years of financial misdirection, a web of shell companies in 4 countries, evidence of the arrangement with Han Sumin's cousin, recorded communications that would be, when delivered to the appropriate parties, comprehensive and devastating. He packaged it and sent it. 1 to the Financial Crimes Division, to the 3 remaining members of the consortium Minjin had infiltrated, to 2 journalists he trusted to be accurate and thorough, and to Park Minjin himself, because some messages needed to arrive with the return address visible. Then he closed the laptop and went back to the room on the 3rd floor. Tabena was awake when he got there. She was sitting up in bed, a daze against her chest, on the television on at low volume showing a Nigerian music video that neither of them were watching. She looked at him when he came in, at his expression, at his posture, and said, "You did something." "I did several things." "Is it done?" "It's in motion. The legal piece will take time. The rest of it is done." Tabena absorbed this. "Did you enjoy it?" The question surprised him into a short, genuine laugh. That's a complicated question. It's a simple question. Did you enjoy dismantling him? I enjoyed that it was precise, Jisuk said, sitting in the chair that had become his chair over the course of 4 days without any formal decision being made. I enjoyed that it was proportionate. He used information and strategy against us, so information and strategy were used against him. There was a satisfaction in the symmetry. Tabena adjusted a daisy. Okay, good. I want to see the evidence. Jisuk looked at her. When not the parts that are going to legal proceedings. I trust you on those. But the part that proves what he did, the photographs, the payments, I want to see it. Why? Because I made 8 months of decisions based on something I believed was true. I want to see the thing that told me the truth was a lie. I need to see it, not for anger, for closure. Jisuk opened his laptop. He turned it toward her. He sat beside her on the bed, careful of her healing incision, and walked her through it. The payments to Han Suman's cousin, the image editing software records, the email thread between Minjin and the woman he'd hired to deliver the photographs to the right journalist at the right moment. The whole architecture of it, laid out in clean, damning detail. Tabena read every word, looked at every document. Her expression was absolutely still throughout. When she reached the end, she looked at the wall for a moment, then looked down at a daze, then closed her eyes. Okay, she said. Why, Tabena? I'm okay. She opened her eyes. They were bright but composed, the expression of a woman doing the internal accounting for something very large and choosing not to be destroyed by it. I'm angry. I'm going to be angry for a while, but I'm okay. She looked at him. I wasted 8 months. We both did. You weren't the one who refused to ask questions. I wasn't the one who was given false information by a person who sat at our wedding. He paused. We both made errors. Mine was letting you go without a fight because I confused restraint with love. Yours was deciding the evidence was complete before asking me directly. We both get to own our part. Tabena was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about this. For 8 months. You rehearsed this conversation. Many times, in my apartment, at Taejun. Poor Taejun. He's resilient. Tabena looked at him and then, with the specificity of a woman who makes deliberate decisions and is making one now, she leaned sideways and put her head on his shoulder. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was quiet and precise, and it meant exactly what it meant. Jisuk sat very still, not moving, not saying anything, afraid that if he responded too much, she might reconsider. I'm not saying everything is fixed, she said into his shoulder. Mine, I know. I'm not saying the last 8 months don't need to be talked about extensively, and probably with some professional assistance at some point. Agreed. I'm saying that you flew here in the middle of the night, and you stayed, and you found the evidence, and you are currently sitting in a hospital chair that is far too small for you with no complaint, and that counts for something. It counts for everything, he said quietly. Or I hope it does. And I plan to spend a significant amount of time making sure it does. Adaze, perhaps sensing the shift in the air above her, opened her eyes, looked up at both of them with the ancient, unimpressed assessment of a newborn taking inventory of her world, and then closed them again. She's going to be so much trouble, Tabena said fondly. She comes by it honestly from both directions. Is that an accusation? It's an observation. One from someone who negotiated the terms of our first date for 45 minutes. I was clarifying expectations. You sent me a written summary afterward. I was being thorough. But she was laughing quietly against his shoulder, and Jisuk stored it away with all the others and thought that 8 months was a long time to go without a sound like that. By the 4th day, Adazy's fever had fully resolved and the doctor was talking about discharge. Tabena was healing well. Ainabeka had appointed herself the organizational authority on everything from the discharge paperwork to the car arrangement to the question of where Tabena and the baby would go when they left. This last question was where the negotiation resumed. You should come back to Seoul, Jisuk said. Tabena, who was dressed for the first time in 4 days and looking entirely herself again, and which was to say formidable and beautiful and like someone who had not slept enough but was not going to mention it, looked at him over the top of Adizi's carrier. Excuse me. Not permanently, not immediately, but Adiz should know where she's from on both sides of her family. Seoul is part of that. Seoul is your city. It can be hers too. I haven't lived in Seoul for 8 months. I have a life here. I have an office here. I'm rebuilding my family's import business. And I'm not asking you to choose, Jisuk said. I'm asking you to consider time in both places. I'm asking you to let me be a father, not a concept she hears about and meets twice a year. I'll come here. We go there. We build something that isn't only in one place. Tabena looked at him for a long moment, doing the thing where she weighed something fully before responding. You'd come here, to Lagos. I'd go anywhere you are. That's not a business strategy. One, that's a declaration. Yes, he said. It is. Abeki, passing through the room with Adez's hospital bag, made a sound that she attempted to disguise as clearing her throat. Abeke, Tabena said. I cleared my throat. I am allowed to clear my throat in a hospital. That is literally one of the appropriate locations for that. Tabena turned back to Jisuk. I need time, not 8 months of silence. Just time to think about what this looks like going forward. We have a daughter now. One which means we have a relationship for the rest of our lives regardless of what form it takes. I'm not going to rush the form. I don't want you to rush it. But you're staying involved. Non-negotiably. Then let's start there. She picked up her bag. And Jisuk. She used his name without the formal address, the way she used to, and he felt the difference the way you feel a change in air pressure. Thank you for coming. Abeke was right to call you. And even though I told her not to. She's a better friend than you deserve. She really is. Tabena glanced at Abeke, who was pointedly arranging items in a bag she had already arranged. Don't tell her I said that. I heard every word, Abeke said. Tabena sighed. I know, you always do. The following months were not simple. Nothing about their situation was simple, and neither of them had ever been people who dealt in uncomplicated things, so this was not a surprise. Im Jisuk returned to Seoul and managed the Minjin fallout, which was extensive and deeply satisfying in the way that comprehensive consequence always is. Park Minjin's 3-year financial scheme unraveled within a month of the documents reaching their targets. He was removed from 2 boards, investigated by financial authorities in 2 countries, and found himself facing the specific social consequence of having been publicly exposed as a man who destroyed a marriage as a business tactic, and which was the kind of story Seoul's elite circles could not resist discussing at length. His organization did not survive the reputational damage. Jisuk did not celebrate. He simply moved forward. True to his word, he was in Lagos 3 weeks after leaving, this time for 10 days. He came with no agenda except to be present, to learn how to be in the same city as Tabena without the architecture of crisis, holding everything together. It was harder in some ways, easier in others. One, they argued twice, real arguments about real things, about communication, and about the expectations they had failed to articulate to each other during their marriage, about what it meant for him to be less opaque and for her to ask before deciding she already had the answer. The arguments were uncomfortable and important, and afterward both of them were clearer than they had been. He learned Lagos slowly, which was the only way to learn it. Tabena's oldest aunt, on a woman named Mama Chidera, who was 73 years old and had opinions about everything and the confidence to state all of them, sized him up at a Sunday family lunch with the assessment of a woman who had seen many things and was not easily impressed. She watched him with Adez, watched him listen to Tabena's younger cousins without performing patience, watched him eat her cooking without diplomatic hesitation because it was genuinely excellent and he said so. And at the end of the lunch, she said to Tabena in Igbo, something that made Tabena's aunt on the other side of the table inhale sharply. What did she say? Jisuk asked. Tabena looked at him with an expression caught between amusement and something more serious. She said you'll do. High praise, Abeki observed from the other end of the table. The highest she gives, Tabena agreed. Mama Chidera picked up her glass, utterly unbothered, and continued her previous conversation. In Seoul, when Tabena came for the first time with Adez, Jisuk's housekeeper Mrs. Park had prepared the guest room as a nursery without being asked, which made Tabena blink and then look at Jisuk with an expression he chose to interpret as appreciation. He took her to places she had never seen in the years she had lived there as his wife, because his soul had been the soul of business and negotiation, and he had never made time to show her the other version. And they walked along the Han River in the evening with Adaze strapped to Jisuk's chest in a carrier that he had researched thoroughly, and that Tabena had absolutely not photographed him putting on for the first time. She had photographed it immediately. "I can see you doing that," he said. "I'm simply documenting the experience. You're going to show Abeka." "I have already sent it to Abeka." Taejun, a meeting to Bena at a dinner that Jisuk organized with approximately 3 times more care than any business meeting he had ever arranged, was formally polite and professionally reserved, and then, when he thought Jisuk wasn't watching, snuck a look at Adaze in her carrier with an expression of complete helpless softness that told Jisuk everything he needed to know about his second-in-command's true feelings about babies. "She has your focus," Taejun said finally in Korean to Jisuk. "Mine, she has her mother's," Jisuk replied, also in Korean. From across the table, where she had been conducting a perfectly comfortable conversation with Taejun's wife in English, Tabena looked up and said, in Korean that was not perfect, but was entirely comprehensible, "I understood that." Taejun stared at her, then looked at Jisuk. "You didn't tell me she spoke Korean." "She didn't when we were married. One she started learning 8 months ago." Tabena set down her chopsticks with the satisfaction of someone who has timed a revelation correctly. "I had time," she said, "and I was angry. Learning the language of the person I was angry at seemed productive." Taejun's wife covered her mouth. Taejun himself, after a moment, smiled, genuinely, the expression of a man who had been professionally serious for so long that his actual face was slightly surprised by the experience. "Oh, she's going to be a problem," he told Jisuk. "The best kind," Jisuk agreed. 8 months after Adaze's birth, on a Tuesday afternoon in Lagos when the light was coming through the windows at the angle that made everything in the apartment gold, Tabena looked up from her laptop where she had been reviewing an import contract and found Jisuk standing in the doorway of her home office. He was holding Adaze, who was awake and investigating his ear with the focused intensity she brought to all research, and he was looking at Tabena with an expression she had learned to read over the course of more than 2 years of watching his face, an expression that meant he was about to say something he had rehearsed and was choosing to say anyway. "I have a question," he said. "You have many questions. You always have many questions. Why don't you research everything?" "This one is different." He shifted Adaze to his other arm. She objected briefly, and then found his collar button and became absorbed in that. "I've been thinking about what we are now, what this is, what we've built in the last 8 months. And? And I don't think it has the right name yet." Tabena looked at him over the top of her laptop. "Co-parents who are taking it slow?" "That's several words. It's accurate. It's insufficient." He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her desk, Adaze settled in his lap now, apparently having decided his collar button was adequately explored. He looked at Tabena steadily. "I want to marry you again." The room was quiet except for the sound of the city outside and Adaze narrating something to herself in the pre-language of a baby with opinions. "Jisuk," Tabena started. "Why not right now? Not tomorrow. I'm not proposing today. I don't have a ring on me, which I consider a failure of preparation I intend to correct." The ghost of a smile at the edge of his mouth. "I'm telling you my intention, so that you're not surprised, so that this information you have and can think about with the time you need to think about it. Because the last time I let decisions happen to us without enough conversation, and it cost us 8 months and nearly cost us everything." Tabena looked at him for a long moment, at him and at their daughter sitting in his lap, looking back at Tabena with dark eyes that were becoming, week by week, more observant and more specifically her own. "You're different," Tabena said finally. "In what way?" "You say things now, directly. You used to communicate in implication. And you would indicate a feeling from 3 rooms away and expect the feeling to be received. I was raised to believe directness was weakness. And now? Now I think concealment is the weakness. Directness is simply efficiency." A pause. "Also, I went to see someone, a therapist, while you were in Lagos and I was in Seoul, and I had a significant amount of time to think about behavioral patterns." Tabena stared at him. "You went to therapy?" "Yes." Kwon Ji-suk, Han, who once told me that self-examination was something he managed internally. That was before I understood what internally managing things had cost me. Tabena closed her laptop. She looked at her ex-husband, the father of her daughter, the man she had spent 8 months being comprehensively furious with and missing in equal measure, sitting in her home office in her city with their child in his lap, telling her about therapy with the same direct tone he used for business analysis. "When I went too," she said. His expression shifted. "When?" "Starting 3 months ago, when Adais started sleeping through the night and I had space to think about things besides survival, I realized I had patterns of my own to examine. The deciding I already had the answer, the leaving before being left, the keeping the pregnancy to myself because I was afraid." She met his eyes. "I've been working on it." "How is it?" "Uncomfortable and useful. One, the same way most important things are." Adaizi slapped both palms on Jisuk's knee with the triumphant energy of someone who has just accomplished something, and both her parents looked at her, and both of them smiled, and it was the same smile. "Tell me when you've thought about it," Jisuk said. "The other question. Take the time you need, I'm not going anywhere." "You said that in the hospital too." "I meant it then, I mean it more now." Tabena looked at him. Xiao, she thought about 8 months of absence and construction and grief and the very specific kind of anger that only exists because underneath it is something you have not stopped wanting. She thought about a 2:47 in the morning phone call and a hospital corridor and a hand on her lower back pressing exactly where the pain was without asking how. "Okay," she said. Jisuk looked at her carefully. "Okay, you'll think about it, or—" "Okay, yes," Tabena said. "Him when you have the ring and the time is right and you ask me properly." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I'm not saying it will be simple. Nothing about us has ever been simple. I'm not saying there won't be more arguments. There will absolutely be more arguments. I look forward to them. I'm saying that I choose this. I choose you. Not because of a days, though she is the best thing either of us has ever produced. Because 8 months of not being with you was empirically worse than every complicated thing about being with you, and I am a woman who responds to data." Jisuk stood from the chair, transferred a daize to one arm with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 8 months learning, belatedly, how to hold an infant, crossed to Tabena's side of the desk, and kissed her in the particular way that communicated everything his implication from 3 rooms away approach had always failed to deliver clearly. Adais, held between them, expressed a loud opinion about the interruption to her afternoon. "She has your timing," Jisuk said. "She has yours. It's impeccable." They were married again on a Saturday in Lagos, in Tabena's family compound, on under a canopy of orange and gold fabric that her aunties had organized with the logistical ferocity of a military campaign. The ceremony was 2 parts, traditional in the afternoon with Tabena in deep indigo and gold beads and Jisuk in agbada that Mama Chidera had ordered made specifically for him in colors she had decided were correct, and which he had accepted without argument because he was learning. And in an exchange of vows in the evening that Tabena wrote herself and read with the particular directness of a woman who had decided that feelings articulated clearly were better than feelings implied beautifully. She said, "I spent 8 months without you learning everything I still had to learn about myself, and then I spent the next 8 months watching you do the same, and I think we are finally genuinely the people who deserve the life we're building. And I choose you today with full information and 0 illusions and the very specific certainty that being complicated together is better than being simple apart." Jisuk said, "You once sent me a written summary of the terms of our first date. I found it last year while I was packing my apartment. I kept it. I have kept everything. I will always come when you call. I will always show up. I will always find the evidence and stay in the chair and press exactly where it hurts. And this is a promise I have the data to support." Abeke cried very loudly and did not apologize for it. Taejun did not cry and spent considerable energy looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man containing something large. Mama Chidera watched from her chair with the satisfaction of a woman who has made a correct assessment and been proven right, which is the best feeling available to anyone. A days, and who had been passed between aunties and cousins all day with the cheerful adaptability of a child who understood instinctively that she was very loved, fell asleep during the vows in the arms of her great aunt and did not stir until the celebration was fully underway. 2 years later, they had found a rhythm that looked nothing like what either of them had expected and exactly like what their actual lives required. On Lagos in the spring, when the import business entered its highest season, and Tabena needed to be present for negotiations that she handled with the efficient confidence of someone who had inherited her grandmother's instincts and refined them with her own. Seoul in the autumn, when Jisuk's transitioning enterprise required his direct attention, because he was doing it. The slow, deliberate work of moving his holdings toward legitimate structures, not all at once, not cleanly, but steadily and with purpose. Adaze was 2.5 and had opinions about everything and the vocabulary to express them in 3 languages, which she used interchangeably in the same sentence without any apparent awareness that this was remarkable. She called Taejin Uncle Tae and had discovered that he would give her whatever she pointed at if she looked at him long enough, which Tabena found alarming and Jisuk found professionally instructive. On a Sunday morning in Seoul, and Tabena found Jisuk on the apartment terrace with Adaze, who was sitting on his lap narrating something to the city below with the authority of someone delivering an important briefing. She stood in the doorway and watched them, this tableau of the life she had chosen with full information and zero illusions, and felt the particular satisfaction that has no name for it, but that lives in the chest just under the sternum. She went out onto the terrace and sat beside him, and Adaze immediately abandoned her briefing and climbed onto Tabena's lap with the decisive energy of someone reprioritizing. "What was she telling you?" Tabena asked. "A detailed assessment of the building across the road," Jisuk said. "She has notes." "Of course she does." Adaeze patted Tabena's face with both hands, inspected her, appeared satisfied, and turned back to consider the city with the focused attention of someone who is going to have things to say about it. "I got a call from Taejun this morning," Jisuk said. "The final property in the portfolio transitions to legitimate management in 6 months. It will be complete." Tabena looked at him. "Complete, complete?" "Complete, complete," she exhaled. "How does that feel?" He thought about it honestly, the way he had learned to do things with full information and without performance. One like putting down something I had been carrying for so long I had stopped noticing the weight. He looked at her. "Like arriving somewhere." "Good," she said. "That's how it should feel." Adaze slapped both palms on Tabena's arm with the triumphant satisfaction of someone who has just reached a personal milestone. "And she," Tabena said, looking at their daughter with the expression she had been unable to contain from the first moment in a Lagos hospital room, gets to grow up not knowing what it cost. "That's the point of all of it," Jisuk said. "Everything we did, everything we changed, so that she gets to not know." Tabena leaned into his shoulder. He wrapped one arm around her and one around Adaze, who leaned back against his chest and resumed her assessment of the city, with the executive comfort of someone who has decided the situation is satisfactory. The life on this terrace, this Sunday morning, and these 2 people who had nearly missed each other permanently and chosen instead to be the kind of complicated, deliberate, arguing, loving family that was worth all the work it required. That was the only empire that had ever actually mattered. And it was built, like all real things, not on fear, but on the specific courage of showing up. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who believes in second chances. And subscribe to this channel because there are more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. And drop in the comments, was Tabena right to keep the pregnancy secret, or should she have called him the moment she found out? Let's talk about it. We'll see you in the next one.